Blog Talk Radio.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome all of you back to Ohio Exopolitics. I'm your host, Mark Snyder. I'm going to talk about something called the Nokodemion lineage today. It had what felt like a very successful study this afternoon. Now being able to articulate it, of course, is going to be a little bit more of a challenge since this is new information. Well, partially new information in any sense. One of the things I wanted to bring out is that the spirit form that currently is alive in Edward Albert Meyer is 9.6 billion years old and has been incarnating since then. He's also incarnated as a person called Henoch 8 billion years ago, twice on Earth as an individual called Semyasa, once at 389,000 years ago, another 14,000 years ago. 3 times as an individual named Henoch with a CH, which is the person that we call Enoch today. That was once 13,500 years ago, 9,000 years ago, then somewhere around 4,000 years ago as the third Henoch. Then as Elijah in about 891 BC, 772 BC for Isaiah, Jeremiah, 662 BC. And then 2 interesting incarnations as philosophers. One is Socrates, around 469 BC, Aristotle, 384 BC, and then as Emmanuel in about, I guess we could say 3 AD. And this is part of what I wanted to try to get to today, to paint a little different picture of the prophet Emmanuel than we might have in our minds. You know, these people at this age didn't have toilets, they didn't have toilet paper, they never really saw anything that would be similar to a toothbrush, at least not to my knowledge. So I think we have somewhat of a romantic idea about who these people were and what they were like. The Meyer information doesn't use the term Jesus, and it's interesting. I kind of went off on a personal goal to try to prove the Meyer material wrong, and I found out there wasn't a letter J until about 1550. So not in the Old English was there a letter J, not in the Hebrew and Greek of the Old Testament. In the New Testament there was no letter J, so there logically could be no one named Jesus or John or James or Job. They had different names during that time. There was something called the First Council of Nicaea that occurred around 325 AD when the Roman Emperor Constantine brought all these rulers together. And one of the things they were trying to do was to agree on the name of the person that we currently today call Jesus. Now, the Meyer material calls him Emmanuel, pronounced or with a letter J, and that letter J comes from the language of the Lyrians. More about that later. But in any case, The history of the letter J is this. It's the youngest letter of our alphabet. Important figures that lived before the letter J was invented. It was invented right around 1550 with an Italian scholar named Giorgio Turissino when he started to substitute the letter J for the letter I in various ways. And another example of changing names of the New and the Old Testament. For example, the word Jehovah. Well, this individual's name wouldn't be called Jehovah in the ancient world by any the people on earth because they didn't really use the letter J. There was no letter J at all. Now, no books before 1600 had the letter J in them. Copies of the Gutenberg Bible still exist, and in them the Book of Job is called the Book of Iob. And the Gutenberg Bible was the first major book printed using movable type. It was first printed around 1455. The original first 1611 version of the King James Bible had no letter J in it. However, the 1769 version of the King James Bible had the letter J in it. The original 1611 version, you don't see the name Jesus, you see the name I-E-S-U-S. You don't see the name James. It's I-A-M-E-S. And the same with John, it's I-O-H-N and rather. So the letter I existed and was used instead of what we would use today. Now let me step back again to the First Council of Nicaea. And during that time, the Roman aristocracy worshipped two Greek gods, Apollo and Zeus. It makes me wonder if maybe there were real extraterrestrial peoples on the earth during those days with those names. It's just a wonder. There was something called the Edict of Milan right around 1313. And that's what made Christianity legal at that time, I believe. Before then, it was illegal to practice Christianity. Because Julius Caesar, the person we call Julius Caesar today, his name probably began with an I. It's kind of hard for us to pronounce that way. Because Caesar was hailed as God made manifest and a universal Savior at that time. And there's some very interesting information on the web about the Council of Nicaea. Interesting website, if it's still there, called Yahweh.com that talks about this meeting in the Council of Nicaea, which kind of resonated with me. And throughout this meeting, there were various heated debates, and the names of 53 gods were tabled for discussion. But they could never agree. And then finally, according to this website anyway, the new God, which we call Jesus Christ today, was called Jesus Krishna. And they decided to combine Krishna, which is the Savior God of the East. Krishna is Sanskrit for Christ, and the Jesus, and Jesus was a Druid god, evidently. So they combined the name Jesus Krishna. So I'm talking a little bit about Emmanuel, but I'll get back to the Nokodemion lineage in a minute. I want to spend a few minutes about some of the things that have happened in the past with all this. But there was no name Jesus in the ancient world because there was no letter J. It didn't exist at that time. There was no letter J in the ancient world. It did not come around to about 1550. It did not exist in the Hebrew, Greek, Aramaic, or any other language in the ancient world. So perhaps he was called Yeshua or Iesus, but there was no letter J in the Greek language. And in my notes here, I have all the letters of the Greek alphabet and what their equivalents were. And there was no equivalent for the letter J. For example, one of the letters in the Greek alphabet is alpha, which the equivalent would be A. Another letter in the Greek alphabet would be beta, which is equivalent for our letter B. Gamma would be the equivalent of our letter G. But if you go down through all of these Greek names, alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, xi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, epsilon, phi, chi, psi, omega, there is no letter J. So they didn't use it. Typically, what would happen is they would use the letter I or the iota. So the only reason I came across this was because I didn't think the Meyer material was right about this name Emmanuel. How could they, how could we be so far off? Well, the fact is, we are and we were. And the same with the letter J. Doesn't appear in any of the equivalent of the Hebrew alphabet, whether you're talking about Vav or Nun or Tet or Beit or Aleph or any other letters in the Hebrew. And if you go, and I haven't bought one yet, I probably should, I'd like to buy one. In the 1611 of the King James, it refers to IESVS, Iesus, says, or IESVS. This is the New Testament of the Lord and Savior, IESVS Christ. So, the letter J originated as a swash letter for the long I, and eventually this new letter had a new pronunciation, and it was substituted for the old I that would appear in these it would be substituted for the iota, I guess, if it was in the Greek that they were looking at. So, for example, there's no W, J, or U in the Old English, and there's a great YouTube video on the letter J if you want to look up the letter J. It's the youngest letter in our alphabet. It never existed until about 1600. Its distinctive usage emerged in the Middle High German. And as I said earlier, a fellow named Gian Giorgio Trurissino was the first to explicitly distinguish between the I and the J, representing separate sounds. And then the letter J started to emerge, and it didn't exist in the Hebrew, Latin, or the Greek either. So a lot of these names, Jesus, Joseph, Justinian, etc., the sound we write as J was pronounced with the English letter Y, which is very, very hard for us to pronounce. So again, I'm kind of talking about the Nokodemion lineage here. The Spearfortum of Edward Albert Meyer lived a life as Emmanuel in the ancient past, and he was a teacher at that time. And we shouldn't really have any romantic notions about these people at this time because, they didn't have toilet paper, they didn't have toilets, they didn't have a toothbrush. These were very, very primitive conditions that we were living on, which is interesting because I think before the fall of Atlantis and Lemuria, the extraterrestrial civilizations that were here were very, very advanced. So we are a civilization with amnesia. We've forgotten who we are, where we come from. In many ancient paintings of the crucifixions, you will see the acronym INRI at the top of the cross. And these letters stood for a Latin phrase saying, Iesus Nazarenus Rex Iodorium. The Latin uses I instead of the English J and V instead of the U. And the translation that we use today is Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. And we would say Iesus Nazarenus Rex Iodorium if we didn't use our pronunciation of the letter J. So, the origins of the name Emmanuel. Well, Emmanuel is spelled with a J, but that J didn't come from any English, any ancient English, ancient Hebrew, ancient Greek, or any earth-based language. It comes from the old Lyrian So, there was a 2,000-year-old biographical narrative of a man named Emmanuel who devoted his life to the teaching of the true nature of the universe and the immortality of the human spirit through reincarnation. So, it's very interesting that the Maya information says the original name of the Christ figure was not Yeshua, even though you can make a logical argument that it was. So, this Emmanuel with the letter J was a very old name of the old Lyrians or the Vagans. Now, and this is where we get to the story of the Nokodemion lineage, which goes back to Lyra Vega. And hopefully we'll get back to that. I've really steered more into the story of Emmanuel, which I necessarily didn't originally plan on going to. But all of this information is connected. The story of the life of Emmanuel is told in the book called The Talmud of Emmanuel, which I have the original version, which is not so good. And Billy has come out with a new version, a corrected translation with a lot better, which I just, for whatever reason, haven't gotten to yet. So, in 1963, a Greek priest named Isa Rashid discovered a small cave in a slope on a hill in Jerusalem, and in this cave was an ancient manuscript called the Talmud of Emmanuel that gives a different story of this person that we call Jesus today. Billy Meyer happened to be with Isa Rashid at this time, and I think he was the one that originally crawled inside this old cave and found this information. Now, the names Emmanuel do appear in both the Old and New Testament. So in Isaiah 7:14 it says, "Therefore the Lord himself will give you a sign. Behold, a young woman shall conceive and bear a son, and shall call his name Emmanuel." And in the New Testament, Matthew 1:23, "Behold, a virgin shall conceive and bear a son, and his name shall be called Emmanuel." Now, the Meyer material says the whole idea of the virgin birth isn't true either. There was an individual named Gabriel who was an extraterrestrial man that mated with a woman named Mary, and the offspring was Emmanuel. And the spirit form in Emmanuel is the Nokodemion spirit form, the same spirit form that was in Muhammad and Johann Georg Faust and Galileo Galilei and Mozart and Mendelssohn and Rasputin. The same spirit form that originated in Aristotle, Socrates, Jeremiah, Isaiah, Elijah, and the three Henochs before that we call Enoch today. And he can trace it back to Semyasa, who was here, not Semyasi, but Semyasa, who was here during the time of Atlantis and Lemuria. There were like two Atlantis and Lemurias in two different time frames. And in each one of these two different time frames, an individual named Semyasa mated with an earth woman and produced an Adam, an individual named Adam. And before Semyasa was a man named Henoch. This is 8 billion years ago. So what we're actually getting to is reincarnation and the 7 stages of human evolution. So we go through 7 stages of evolution in the human existence. We start out in primitive life, where we have a human body, and we go to the 2nd stage of evolution, which is called rational life. And the third stage is intelligent life. We're currently in rational life here on the earth. At least allegedly, we're in rational life. We have the ability to behave rationally. We don't always do that. We have the ability to think in a rational way. We of course don't always do that. That's the second stage of human evolution. The third stage we're just on Earth starting to evolve into. It's called intelligent life. And at this stage we start space travel. We get into genetic engineering. And the fourth stage of human life, this is called real life. Some of the Plejaren are still in that stage. Real life, for example, we become true space travelers and we can travel through great distances to different star systems with almost no time passing. The Plejaren also can do this. In the fourth stage, we also learn tremendous genetic engineering. And for example, Billy's third contact, a woman named Semyase, had a ship, a metallic disc that had a biologically engineered computer inside it. It was biological. It was sentient. It was just astonishing. A machine with a biological intelligence that was sentient, intelligent. And she could communicate with it telepathically. An incredible thing. In the fifth stage, which I call life and creational wisdom, these extraterrestrials can do tremendous things. And they're humans, just like us. We're just not that evolved yet. They can do incredible things with their minds. With the material consciousness, can do incredible things. We have both a spiritual consciousness and a material consciousness. Each physical lifetime that we have, we get a new material consciousness. We have the same spirit form through all these lifetimes. And the spirit form goes in the center of the middle brain in an area called the superior colliculus. It comes into the body of a child 21 days after the sperm fertilizes the egg. It causes the heart to beat and it sends its energy throughout the whole body. The spirit form never dies, it never sleeps, it records everything that you do. It will even tell you if your thinking is right or wrong, if you've learned to pay attention to it. So the purpose of all of this evolution is the evolution of our consciousness. So we spend the first 5 stages reincarnating into a physical body. We take 40 to 60 million years to do that. We spend 18 million years in the physical body, in physical lifetimes. With a body, people can see us, we can interact in the material world. Now, if you have a 100-year life, under normal conditions, a 100-year physical life, we would spend a time and a half or 152 years in the spiritual realm. After you die, your spirit form comes out of your body with your consciousness, and it goes into this energy band around our planet, as we sometimes call the spirit realm. And what happens in that spirit realm is that your spirit form is processing the information from your previous life. And what it does is it captures these consciousness forms, which can be your confidence, your logic, your intuition, your sense of patience and perseverance, your sense of fairness, your idea of love, all these consciousness forms. And it gets the essence of what you've learned about these things in this life. And your spirit form absorbs all of that information. And it gets more intelligent, it gets stronger. And this is the whole purpose, is the spirit form absorbing this information that you learn in each one of these physical lifetimes. And if everything is working normally, a spirit form will spend about a time and a half in the spirit realm where all this goes on in something called the consciousness block, which is like a storage area in the spirit realm. And the spirit form is processing all your consciousness, and it gets these consciousness forms, and the spirit form absorbs them and gets smarter and more evolved because of what you learned as your material consciousness learned in the previous lifetime. Then the spirit form creates a new personality, a new consciousness, a new subconsciousness, and a new unconsciousness. So it creates a new consciousness for your next life. The spirit form does. Your spirit form is your spiritual consciousness. And it programs into your subconsciousness all of the wisdom of your previous life. Now, you can't really access it. It's a good thing. You kind of get impulses, kind of a knowing. You get hunches. You typically, unless something kind of goes wrong, typically, people usually, not always, but people usually don't remember at our current level of evolution. They don't remember what they've experienced in the previous life consciously. And that's kind of a protection mechanism, so you don't have to deal with all the sadnesses and the difficulties and the failures you had in your previous life. It's difficult enough dealing with the challenges in this life. So that forgetting is kind of a barrier that we naturally have until we get into like the fourth and fifth stages of evolution. And at that point, you're advanced enough to handle those kinds of understanding and knowings from your previous existences. So this is the whole kind of reincarnation process through stages 1 through 5. Under ideal conditions, you'll spend 18 million years in the physical body, 42 million years in the spirit realm processing all this, which is about a time and a half, I guess. So it's a long, arduous process, the 7 stages of human evolution. Now, on a planet like ours where there's overpopulation, and I know a lot of people argue, well, there's so much space. All we need, we have all this space. All we just need to do is spread out. Well, that's not realistic. People, they have to really live. The way things have evolved on our Earth is the way things go, where people go to the areas where there's moderate weather, and they naturally go to the areas where there's fresh water, and they populate these areas. They don't spread out abnormally, and they don't go to you don't see a majority of the people living in Antarctica where there's 5 million square miles. That doesn't work. But we do an incredible damage to our biosphere when we crowd into these cities. What happens is, as we crowd into areas, we wipe out the forest and we run off all the animals. Now, the forest and the animals work together to create an environment for the biosphere, and everything is in a delicate balance. The forests moderate the weather. They make it shadier in the summer, so it's cooler air in the shaded area. They make it a tad warmer in the winter because it slows that cold, icy wind down. The trees do, and they stop all that reflection. The albedo is lower in the forests. So it moderates the weather. It keeps it cooler in the summer and warmer in the winter, so you don't form these great storms where the hot air and the cold air slam together and produce the tornadoes and such. Also, the top of the forest creates a turbulence when the wind blows over it, and that turbulence, that spinning air, tends to help form clouds. moisture and then helps the rain. The grasslands in Africa are also incredibly important. All the acres, miles of grasslands, because they stop the spread of the desert. And you have to have those herds of animals, not domesticated livestock from man, but the real herds of the wild animals moving quickly over that area. They fertilize the land and help these grasslands continue. So there's this incredible, delicate biosphere that must be maintained with all these different plants and animals. All of the animals are incredibly important. The predator-prey relationship, the animals that provide the dung that helps the grass grow in Africa and in our forests here, and the forests that create the moderate weather. You see, that's why we're having this immoderate weather, this intense weather, because we're thinking in such a limited way. We're saying if there's space, and there's oodles of space on the earth, and you could cram billions and millions of people into a very small area. In fact, you could probably build a gigantic skyscraper to even cram more people in one area. It's the thing. You could do a lot of things, but what we really need to do is have a planet with a smaller population. And I know this is one thing that the elite have said, is that we need about 1 billion people, or 500 million, and they happen to be right about that one thing. So I know that's controversial. I kind of went off on a tangent there, talking about what happens in the spirit realm and how much time you spend in the physical and the spirit realm. What happens when there's a gigantic overpopulation on our planet? The spirit forms get yanked out of the spirit realm before they're done processing all the information from their previous life. And the consciousness forms do not get completely created and not completely absorbed by the spirit form. So the spirit form comes back into the body of a child before it's completely learned from the experiences of the previous life. It doesn't process all that information. So you're unprepared when you come back into the physical realm. So you're more dependent on your parents. If you're a male, you're going to have a harder time forming a male personality. So we have a lot of problems with gender identity and transgender, and that's caused in part by the overpopulation. So I talked about the 5 stages of human evolution and physical bodies. Well, we have a 6th stage. And during this time, the spirit form evolves into what's called the half-spirit level, sometimes called the High Council. It's a wavering, half-physical, half-material, half-spiritual form. And we spend 56 million years in that state. And then we go into the 7th stage of evolution. And I've got some more exact numbers for you here. We spend 364 million years in this totally spirit level, which is the 7th stage of evolution. And there are 7 stages. Each one of these stages has a name, beginning with Arhadathrasada and going up all the way to the final level, which is the Patali level. So I think we spend about 52 million years in each one of those levels. And we spend about 364 million years total as a completed spirit form that no longer needs a body. And then finally, we merge with creation. And I believe it takes about 2.5 billion years to merge with creation. So that's the life cycle of the human being, of the spirit form. So you really don't die. You never actually, your spirit form, your spiritual consciousness never really passes, never really dies. Your physical body does die, but the spirit form doesn't. We talked about, I didn't really talk much about this, where this information comes from. This information I'm giving you now comes from the writings of a fellow named Edward Albert Meyer, known by a lot of people as Billy Meyer. He lives in Switzerland in a tiny mountain village called Hinterschmidruti, which is 45 minutes east of Zurich. He has written many books, 50-plus books. He's 81 years old. And one of these books is called The Might of Thoughts, Macht der Gedanken. And it teaches us how to live, how to have neutral positive thoughts, how to have balanced thinking so that we don't become unstable in our thoughts, so we don't make bad decisions. As long as we're thinking in a neutral positive way, if we are trying to turn our ideas into ideals with an L, if we're trying to think things through and we're confident, we're optimistic, we're relaxed, we're cheerful, we're enthusiastic, we persevere, we persist, we're satisfied, if we have all these ideas and we don't ignore the negative, we realize that the negative and the positive are two powers which belong together. We should also remember that negative thoughts, though, need to be treated like weeds in our garden. Just like you weed your garden, you need to weed your consciousness and get rid of any negative thoughts that pop up. Because negative thoughts can take on a life of their own. One of the negative thoughts that we have to deal with is something called anxiety. And anxiety has nothing to do with fear. Fear is based upon completely different things. It's based upon things. Fear arises as the result of the human being shrinking back from things that he knows about, facts, events, and experiences. Now, anxiety, on the other hand, has to do with unknown factors. So the way we combat anxiety is by learning or researching these unknown factors that we have in our life. And this is one of the challenges that we have, is to continue to think in a neutral, positive way. And this particular book is very critical for our evolution. And it's a very interesting book. It has a lot of interesting ideas in it. And we need to learn not to nurture negative thoughts. As long as you nurture unclean, pessimistic, sick, bad, negative thoughts, you also have bad feelings. Bad feelings come from bad thinking. And if you change your thoughts, you can change your life. So let me read a little something from page 150 from The Might of Thoughts. It says, "Protected thereby is also the body, which as a gentle and plastic instrument immediately reacts to the kind of thoughts that the human being tends and nurtures, so your thoughts affect your health. This is another reason why the human being should not allow habitual thinking to take the upper hand. So that's why Billy says, do not allow your thoughts to drift. Steer your thoughts like a captain steers a ship. You're the master of your own destiny. You create your own life through good feelings, good thoughts, and good habits. And these bring good circumstances into your life. So if you allow your thoughts to be habitually negative, this will bring extremely negative effects. One's thinking, therefore, should not be habitual. Rather, it should be constructive. So if you start to nurture unclean, pessimistic, wrong, sick, bad, and negative thoughts, then your feelings will in turn correspondingly form in that way, and your entire body can be affected. It will affect your life force. There's something that we have, it's called the Lebenskraft, or the life force. We all have a life force. And it says, search for the source of your life force. It says later in this book, and develop it. And you will create for yourself a reliable life potential on which you can depend. So do not nurture negative thoughts, or you'll weaken your life force. So let me continue here. The origin of the thoughts thereby forms from various factors which arise in your ideas and views, as well as your wishes and desires. So it's necessary to control the very origins of our thoughts and have neutral positive thoughts. Otherwise, you will harm your psyche, and your psyche can start to degenerate, either in a positive or a negative imbalance. So what we have to do is maintain a balanced harmony in the psyche. So to brighten up our psyche, we must have thoughts that are life-affirming. And to affirm means to offer emotional support or encouragement. And this is a very interesting idea. You're giving yourself emotional support and encouragement. So many times our thoughts are actually discouraging ourselves. In the same way, your thoughts can affect your appearance. Each wrinkles can appear on the basis of our thoughts. Even your feelings for lower creatures can have an effect on the appearance of your face. There's no better doctor that you can ever get than neutral, positive, equalized, harmonious thoughts. So spiritual forces, for example, are absolutely neutral, positive. And the universal consciousness is neutral, positive in nature. So we need to have a neutral, positive way of looking at things. Now, when you get out of the neutral, positive realm, you've actually enslaved yourself. And you become what's called in the Meyer information, Asar tongue, which is to be out of balance of the good human nature. So you become a slave to yourself, to your self-created imprisonment. But if you think in terms of love and of joy, of freedom and harmony, you will bring all these values to yourselves. So asartung means to get badly out of control of the good human nature. So your good thoughts determine your physical well-being. The majority of all human matters have their roots in the thoughts. Anxiety and fear kill lots of people, thousands of people, all the time. And the wrong thoughts can shake up your entire nervous system. Neutral, positive, equalized, healthy, and happy thoughts will build up your resistance. One's thinking should therefore, you shouldn't be habitual in your thinking. You should always be consciously aware of what you're thinking and not functioning on automatic. So you need pure, healthy, and positive thoughts. Again, wrinkles can emerge through the misuse of thoughts. Foolish thoughts, self-created suffering, wrongly understood and wrongly expressed pride. So your face can be imprinted with your strong and pure thoughts, or it can be imprinted with your negative thoughts. If you've lived peacefully in harmony, then your death will probably be peaceful and harmonious. And we just cross over into the realm of spiritual life. That's all spiritual light. That's all that really happens at that stage. So do not allow your thoughts to drift. Do not have your thoughts, for example, drifting on the ocean of unchecked thoughts, of conscious and unconscious thoughts. We have both conscious thoughts and unconscious thoughts. It's always an amazement to me. We have unhealthy, wrong, negative, and destructive thoughts. Then your feelings will also form in a negative and destructive way. And when you have these negative and destructive feelings, your body becomes susceptible to illness and disease. And the immune system becomes impaired in its effectiveness. But if you have constructive, beautiful, positive, happy, and equalized thoughts, then your feelings will be constructive and positive, happy, and equalized. And your psyche will form likewise. So you have to have a conscious purposefulness in order to bring your thoughts to fruition. And sometimes you can even have an unconscious purposefulness to bring. So your conscious mind focuses on the present moment. Sometimes it's said we have three minds: the conscious mind, the unconscious, and the subconscious. The conscious mind, it can only hold one thought at a time. It really doesn't have a memory. It identifies information, it compares information, it does analysis. And the conscious mind makes a decision. Now, we also have the subconscious mind, or the preconscious mind. And you can become aware of this preconscious information if you direct your mind to it. And it's possible that what is unconscious becomes subconscious and then becomes conscious. You can have long forgotten childhood memories which reemerge after decades. So the unconscious mind has primitive instinctual wishes as well as information that we cannot access. So, and this coincides with some of the theories of Freud and the theory of personality. So your unconscious mind is like a reservoir of thoughts, urges that you may not even be aware of. And most of the contents of the unconsciousness are often unacceptable and unpleasant. You can have feelings in the unconscious of pain, anxiety, conflict. And again, the unconscious mind can be leading you and you may not even know it. And you can be causing things to happen that you're not aware of. And if you could look at the unconscious mind, it may in some ways represent an iceberg where everything above the water is your conscious awareness, which is typically rather small, and the rest of the information outside of the conscious awareness lies below in this gigantic iceberg below what we see as a little small tip. So we have these hidden wishes and desires, and I think there's a little bit about this mentioned in Contact Report 200 if you ever want to look up any more on the unconscious mind. So, and I think a teacher named Carl Graf was one of Billy's great friends, and that Contact Report 200 talks about Carl Graf. When Billy would sometimes ask this Carl Graf very profound questions, and Carl would pass the information on to another psychologist named Gustav Jung. So anyways, very interesting. So purposefulness means to have a purpose. So an intentional purpose, having or manifesting a purpose. In other words, you can enter a room with a purposeful look. Purposefulness has a good meaning in this case. So you set up an aim or a plan. And the Maya information talks about the life zeal. So we have a life determination, a life feel, it's called. So we have conscious strivings. We want to have conscious strivings rather than unconscious strivings. Because your unconscious strivings can bring in events in your life that you're not going to like, that you're not going to want. For example, we have the saying in the Maya information to live and help live rather than live and let live. So we have an obligation to help lower life forms or people that may not have the information that you have. That doesn't mean you can force it on them, and if they're not ready, you have to just completely step back. But it says in page 176 something that I've had memorized at one time and should probably go back to. It says, human beings who do not overcome their weaknesses and do not free themselves from the contents of all their negative and destructive thoughts remain weak, wretched, and miserable. Let me continue here. It says, because their refusal to raise their thoughts brings increasing inner and outer unfreedom, which finally ends in affliction, illness, and ruin. It is the nature of the thoughts that by means of their might alone, every conceivable thing can be brought into fruition. However, before anything can be achieved and brought to fruition, the thoughts must raise themselves above any extreme immoderateness and therefore eliminate it in order to make the necessary room for the healthy, positive purposefulness. This means, in order to be successful, the human being must renounce his selfishness, which as a rule degenerates into immoderateness. So we need to live and help live. And there's something called creational natural laws. And one of the laws that we're learning about right now is the law of neutral positive thinking, the law of balance, the law of harmony, the law of moderateness, you could say. So this is one of the creational natural laws. The first creational natural law is the law of love. It's not romantic love, but a love based on respect and reverence. And then the law of striving to continually work, to continually move forward. And this is striving in all areas of your life, as simple as cleaning out your garage or learning the Maya material. So we want to keep striving. It's very, very critical to follow these creational natural laws. Then the law of harmony, which is the law of neutral positive thinking that we're learning here. Then there's laws like the law of reincarnation, the spirit form returns in another material lifetime, the laws related to population. We've just briefly touched on today where a planet our size has between 500 million and a billion people, and you can certainly fit a lot more people than that on the planet. You can probably fit 20, 30, 40 million people on this planet easily, but you're going to destroy the biosphere. And it's going to be almost impossible, even through higher technology, to keep from destroying the biosphere. And that's what we're doing right now on a grand scale, is destroying the biosphere. So do not fall prey to this really kind of seductive, simplistic thinking that, you can just cram everyone into this little small area, or that you can spread everyone out. and somehow avoid these creational natural laws. These are just laws. I mean, we want to have plenty for everyone. We want to make life easy, not harder. So just keep the population reasonable so that you can have the gigantic forests, the gigantic jungles, the gigantic rainforests, the gigantic grasslands. Otherwise, you're going to have urban, what we have now, the destruction of the entire natural world. So if the human being does not begin to effectively control his thoughts, and he or she never gets into a position of really controlling your intentions and affairs. Furthermore, then there is also no opportunity to adopt and actually bear and fulfill the responsibility for oneself and the responsibility for one's life, as well as the responsibility for all external and internal circumstances and for the environment. And that's what I was getting to, is as our environment. And one of the reasons our environment is completely trashed is because our thinking is negative or it's wildly positive. If a human being does not nurture his or her thoughts in a conscious and controlled way, if he or she does not tend in a conscious and controlled form to setting our own life determinations, our seal, and fulfilling them, then you cannot even act independently, and you can't stand effectively on your own feet, and you can't cope with life. In fact, you constantly will be dependent on the help of others who are creative and constructive in their thoughts, feelings, and deeds. So we need to be intelligent and rational, to depend on ourselves, and to be independent in our thoughts and actions, and to bear full responsibility for them. And we have to take control of the rudder of our life so that we can steer our life in the direction that we want. If we continue to maintain low thoughts, then you will not be able to control your own life. You will not be able to initiate your own well-being. So the human being, his world and his life are limited by his thoughts. And they are formed, your circumstances are formed by how you nurture your thoughts. And your thoughts are brought into realization. And your thoughts determine your prosperity and your adversity. So your life always forms according to your thoughts, which you choose, you tend, and you nurture. And there's going to be errors. We have to deal with our errors. And you should not think of your errors as hindering your success and your evolution. If you make no errors, then you do not learn anything. So we have to continually gain wisdom. And remember that errors are just a positive part of our learning. Well, I hope you've gained something from today's show. I certainly know I have. You've been listening to Ohio Exopolitics, and I'm your host, Mark Snyder. Have a great day.